The first word I think of when I think of any museum is the term preservation. That's what a museum is designed to do, really. They're designed to preserve artifacts for the next generation to learn about them. But when I was researching for my earlier videos, I came across an engine that was preserved in a very different way, quite by accident. This engine was called 115 and was owned by the Furness Railway. Now, before I elaborate, I'm sure that you're all aware of a certain Reverend Audrey who has created a very special set of books about the railway. Thomas the Tank Engine has delighted generations of railway enthusiasts through the years, and the books and the subsequent television show has brought joy to millions. The Reverend drew on real-life events, creating stories. For example, the story of Edward and Gordon was inspired by engines having to be banked up a steep gradient near to his home. In the book called Gordon the Big Engine, there is a story called Down the Mine. To put it briefly, after Gordon had fallen into a ditch and was rescued, Thomas teased him about the incident, so much so that even his carriages were ashamed of the tank engine's behaviour. Later, as he was taking coal trucks, he saw a danger sign and could not understand why engines were not allowed to pass it, when trucks could. So one day he tricked his driver and surged forward. What he didn't know was that the ground was dangerous for heavy engines due to the mines that ran underneath, and subsequently the ground cracked open and he fell through a sinkhole. When the workmen inspected the damage, they called on Gordon the Big Engine to come and rescue Thomas using a winch. With both engines now in disgrace with Sir Topham, following their incidents, Gordon helped Thomas home, and both formed an alliance to always help each other and stand united. I always thought that this story was created purely from the mind of Audrey to show that someone who is bossy and arrogant as Gordon can be useful and helpful. However, I had no idea that the inspiration for the story was actually a real incident. The date was the 22nd of September 1892, and it wasn't far from where the fictional island of Sodor resides. Lindal in Furness lies approximately 8 miles northeast of Barrow in Furness. It's a small mining village supplying iron ore for the steelworks in Barrow. It was originally built around a tarn, but there is no evidence of this today due to the town being filled in with slag from the pits. Today, due to competition overseas, Lindal no longer mines for iron and is now a commuter hub for Barrow. East of Lindal Station, on the Barrow route, 2 main lines and 2 good lines ran along an embankment. This was a pretty substantial part of the line, as 5 sidings ran along with it. The sizable yard meant it was easy to prepare and shunt the iron ore trains to wherever it was needed. At 7 a.m, Furness Railway locomotive number 115, a D1060 tender engine, similar to this one, was busy shunting in the yard, when its driver saw cracks opening up right below the engine. He quickly shut the regulator and jumped out of the cab, dragging his fireman with him. Seconds later, a 30-foot crater appeared right in front of them and swallowed the engine, track, ballast and all, only with its tender visible. The upline was also severely damaged, and the rails hung precariously over the hull. Breakdown gangs were called and they managed to uncouple the tender from the engine and pull it clear. However, the locomotive itself was going to be a whole new level of recovery. Later in the afternoon, as the men were deciding on the best plan of action to get the engine out of the hole, the earth rumbled again. They watched as 115 disappeared out of sight and was engulfed by the earth. The hole widened, and now all the tracks were now twisted and bent. As the engine was deemed no longer salvageable, trucks of ballast was brought in to fill up the gaping hole. It took over 300 ballast wagons to create a firm standing once again. The embankment was carefully monitored over the next few years, and even though smaller subsidences have occurred, no massive sinkhole has ever appeared again. Today, the railway lines once again cross that embankment, where the hole once stood, and there is speculation about the location of 115. Some say that she's only 50 to 60 feet down, but when you consider that the topmost mine was in the excess of 500 feet, there is really no telling where 115 finally ended up. She could even be sitting at the bottom of the embankment. Number 115 is classed as officially preserved, albeit unintentionally. If it was ever planned or decided that a recovery mission to recover 115 ever went ahead, it's doubtful that they're going to find a lot of that missing locomotive. The engine is made of iron, and given the geographical location of the area and the soil and water content, it's unlikely that the engine will be in any salvageable state. 115's only hope is that it is sat broken in a disused mine shaft, but unless we dig down, this is something we will never know. Incidents of machinery falling into the ground may sound unusual, but it's not in fact uncommon. In fact, it was only a few months ago 2 steam locomotives were dug from a river in Australia, having been dumped there as a flood defence in 1927. The 2 engines were entombed in mud and were remarkably well preserved. One of the locomotives was rescued as being the most viable. Unfortunately, the other was deemed too difficult to get out. But the first engine is currently being cleaned and made ready for preservation in a museum. There are also rumours that engines were purposely driven into water once their service had come to an end. And it's not uncommon to see cranes from flooded quarry pits still in the position their drivers left them in years before. While it's not directly museum related, I feel that this is a very unique part of our history. While we may never see this engine, it certainly has a very interesting story to tell. So when you're travelling to Barrow via the Carnforth line and you're going over that embankment, please pause for thought at the lost, buried engine that is lying underneath your feet.